Story 1. The distance between us. The old warmth in his voice made my heart ache for what we were struggling to hold on to. I will, I promise, I responded, offering him a small, hopeful smile before stepping out into the cool evening air. The night's possibilities stretched out before me, endless and uncertain, much like the sprawling campus pathways. The excitement for my project was still there, but now it carried a poignant mixture of concern and longing for the relationship I was still learning to navigate. Tonight would be intense, a blend of creativity and chaos as we worked against the deadline. My friends and I had booked a study room in the university's main library, a place where the air was often thick with the nervous energy of late-night cram sessions and last-minute projects. By the time I arrived at 8 p.m., the atmosphere was already charged. Laptops hummed, papers were strewn across tables, and 3D materials lay in scattered piles, waiting to take shape. Anna, the meticulous planner, ensured everyone stayed on track. John, ever the perfectionist, was adjusting the lighting on our 3D models, making them seem almost lifelike. My role was just as vital. I was in charge of integrating the background graphics, making sure they complemented rather than overwhelmed the models. At 10 p.m. I sent a quick message to Brandon. In full swing here. Hope your evening is relaxing. No immediate response. I pushed the slight worry away, focusing instead on the lively discussions about color schemes and textures that filled the room. Midnight approached and we took a brief coffee break. The library's 24-hour cafe buzzed with exhausted students, their conversations a low hum under the aroma of espresso. As I sipped my coffee, I checked my phone again. Still nothing. A ripple of concern stirred within me. By 2 a.m., we were pushing through, fueled by energy drinks and collective adrenaline. I sent another message, this time more detailed. Still working hard. Miss you. The read receipt popped up immediately. But no reply. The silence gnawed at me. At 4 a.m. we were in the final stretch, exhaustion settling into our bones. I sent one last update. Almost done here. Can't wait for you to see the final product. Love you. This time the lack of response felt heavier. More loaded. By 5:30 a.m., we wrapped up our project. It was stunning, a testament to our hard work. But as my friends celebrated, my heart wasn't fully in it. The unanswered messages cast a shadow over my excitement. I arrived home just as the sun began to rise, its golden light stretching across the quiet apartment. Brandon's side of the bed was untouched. On the kitchen counter, a note. Went out to clear my head. We'll talk when I get back. The message was unlike him, so stark, so cold. I sat at the edge of our bed, the weight of the night pressing down on me. The project was done, but something deeper was unraveling between us. Brandon returned late in the afternoon. The sound of the front door closing felt like a signal. The confrontation was coming. I heard the familiar sounds of his coat being hung, his keys clinking into the dish. He found me in the living room, staring out at the cityscape, lost in thought. His expression was unreadable as he spoke. So, you were out all night? For a project? The skepticism in his voice stung. Yes, Brandon. It was for my final project. You know how important this is for my grade, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the exhaustion. All night though? Seems like a bit much. You could have done some of it at home. His doubt felt like a slap. It wasn't just me. The whole group was there. We had to work together, I explained, frustration creeping in. He scoffed, shaking his head. I don't know, it just doesn't sit right with me. You didn't even call. The air between us thickened. The room seemed smaller. I'm telling you the truth, Brandon, I said softly. I was too busy to call, but I texted you. You just never replied. His gaze hardened. He let out a long sigh. I don't know, it just doesn't. He trailed off. And in that silence, I realized something terrifying. It wasn't just about last night. It was about everything. The distance between us. And how we might not know how to close it anymore. Have you ever felt like you were losing someone, even when you were trying your hardest to hold on? Sometimes, love isn't about the big moments, it's in the small, quiet ones. The late-night texts. The effort to understand. The willingness to believe in each other. Trust is fragile. And once cracks appear, they can spread fast. What do you think Brandon and the protagonist should do next? Should they fight for their relationship or accept that they are drifting apart? Let's jump into the next story. Story 2, The Echoes of Goodbye. The tension in the air was suffocating. Brandon sat across from me, his fingers drumming against the wooden table. A rhythmic, impatient sound that only added to the pressure building between us. The coffee in front of me had long gone cold. So, he finally said, his voice tight. Are we just going to pretend everything is fine? I looked at him, really looked at him. The tired lines around his eyes, the way his shoulders were hunched forward, like he was bracing for impact. He wasn't angry, at least not just angry. He was hurt. I swallowed hard. I don't want to pretend, Brandon. But I also don't want to fight. His jaw clenched. Then tell me the truth. I exhaled sharply. I did tell you the truth. I was working. I was exhausted. And I still made the effort to text you. But you didn't respond. He leaned back, crossing his arms. I didn't respond because I was trying to figure out if I still trust you. The words hit harder than I expected. A sharp, clean cut straight to the heart. My fingers curled around my coffee cup, as if holding on to something solid could keep me from unraveling. Brandon, what are you saying? He looked away for a long moment, his gaze drifting toward the window, where rain had begun to patter softly against the glass. I'm saying, he murmured, voice barely above a whisper, that I don't know if I can keep doing this. The room felt colder. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How do you respond when someone you love tells you they might not love you the same way anymore? For so long, I had convinced myself that we were just going through a rough patch. That if we just tried harder, if we just held on tighter, we could fix whatever was slipping through the cracks. But love isn't just about trying. It's about wanting to try. And for the first time, I realized that maybe Brandon didn't want to anymore. Say something, he said, and I could hear the desperation in his voice now. The frustration. The need for me to fight. But I was tired. So tired. I don't know what you want me to say, I admitted. Because I don't think this is about me anymore. This is about you. And what you choose to believe. He flinched just slightly. That's not fair. Isn't it? I whispered. I've given you everything, Brandon. And I'm standing here right now, still willing to fight. But I can't be the only one. Silence. A long, aching silence that stretched between us like a canyon too wide to cross. And then he reached for his coffee, took a slow sip, and said, I think we need time apart. I think we need time apart. The words echoed in my head, bouncing off the walls of my heart, shattering whatever fragile hope I had left. I should have seen this coming. Maybe I had seen it coming. Maybe I had just been too afraid to face it. I nodded slowly, my throat burning. Okay. That was all I said. Because when someone tells you they need space, you don't beg. You let them go. Have you ever held on to something for so long that you didn't realize it was slipping away? Love isn't just about staying. It's about choosing each other day after day. And sometimes the hardest thing isn't losing someone. It's accepting that they no longer want to be held onto. What do you think? Should they fight for their love, or is it time to let go? Let's jump into the next story. Story 3, When Love Is Not Enough. The first night without Brandon felt like a ghost had settled in the apartment. Everything was the same, but empty. The coffee mug still sat in the sink from that morning. His jacket still hung on the chair by the door. But the space where his presence used to be was now just silence. A hollow, aching silence that stretched through every room. I stood in the kitchen, gripping the counter, trying to breathe through the weight pressing down on my chest. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. We were supposed to be stronger than this. My phone vibrated against the table. For a second, I let myself hope. But it wasn't Brandon. Anna? Hey, you okay? I hesitated before replying. Me? Not really. But I will be. A lot. I didn't know if I would be okay. Because the truth is, no one tells you how painful it is to love someone who isn't sure if they love you back. I should have seen the signs. The way his responses had become shorter. The way his touches had grown hesitant, like he wasn't sure if he was supposed to reach for me anymore. The way he had begun to pull away little by little, until we were two people standing on opposite sides of something neither of us could fix. And yet I had held on. Because I thought love was enough. But love, real love, isn't just about feelings. It's about effort. And for the first time, I had to admit that maybe we had stopped putting in the effort a long time ago. The next few days passed in a blur. I went to class. I smiled when people talked to me. I worked on my final project. But inside, I was unraveling. It wasn't the kind of heartbreak that hit all at once. It was slower. Like a steady, dull ache that refused to fade. And then, on the fourth night, Brandon called. I stared at the screen, heart pounding. I could ignore it. I could let it go to voicemail. But deep down, I knew I needed to hear his voice, if only to know if there was anything left to hold on to. I picked up. Hey. He exhaled. Hey. Silence. The kind that says everything and nothing at the same time. I miss you, he admitted, voice quieter than usual. My eyes burned. Then why did you leave? I don't know, he said. I needed to figure out if we're really meant for each other. If we're making each other happy or if we're just holding on because we're afraid to let go. I closed my eyes, pressing a hand to my forehead. Brandon, I whispered, you don't figure out love. You choose it. Every single day. Pause. And then, I don't know if I can choose this anymore. The words landed like a final blow. I let them sink in. Let the truth of them settle deep into my bones. This was it. This was the moment I had been trying to avoid. The moment where I realized, sometimes, love isn't enough to make someone stay. Sometimes, no matter how much you give, no matter how much you want something to work, the other person has to want it too. And Brandon didn't. Not anymore. I wiped my eyes, forcing myself to breathe through the pain. Okay, I said softly. Then I won't make you. I heard him inhale sharply, like he hadn't expected me to let go so easily. Maybe he had wanted me to fight harder. But love isn't about fighting for someone who doesn't want to stay. It's about knowing when to stop fighting. And for the first time I realized, this wasn't my loss. It was his. Have you ever had to let go of someone you loved? Not because you wanted to, but because you had no choice? One of the hardest lessons in life is realizing that sometimes, no matter how much love you give, it won't be enough to keep someone who doesn't choose you in return. And that's okay. Because the right person won't need convincing. What do you think? Did she do the right thing? Or should she have fought harder? Let's jump into the next story. Story 4, The Weight of Unspoken Words. The days after Brandon left felt like walking through a fog. Everything was muted, distant. I went through the motions, waking up, going to class, working on my final project. But the world had lost its color. It felt strange how normal everything looked when I felt like I had lost something I wasn't sure I'd ever get back. One evening, I found myself at our favorite cafe, the one with the mismatched chairs and soft yellow lighting. I didn't even realize I had walked there until I was standing in front of the counter, ordering his usual drink instead of mine. Old habits die hard. I took my coffee to the back corner where we used to sit and pulled out my laptop. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept replaying our last conversation. I don't know if I can choose this anymore. Those words had stayed with me. Not just because they hurt, but because I finally understood. Brandon hadn't left because he didn't love me. He left because he wasn't sure if love was enough. And maybe that was worse. Because what do you do with a love that's full of doubt? A soft voice pulled me from my thoughts. Is this seat taken? I looked up, startled. A guy, about my age, maybe a little older, stood in front of me holding a cup of coffee and a book tucked under his arm. His dark brown hair was slightly messy, like he had been running his fingers through it all day. There was something familiar about him, but I couldn't place it. I shook my head. No, go ahead. He sat down, pulling out his book. For a few minutes, we sat in silence, each lost in our own world. And then he spoke again. You always look deep in thought when you're here. I blinked. Sorry, do we know each other? He chuckled. Not really. I've just seen you here before. You always order the same thing and sit in this exact spot. I glanced at my drink. Brandon's usual order. A painful knot formed in my throat. Not always, I murmured. He raised an eyebrow but didn't push. Instead he held up his book. Need a distraction? I highly recommend this one. I glanced at the title. It was one I had been meaning to read for ages. A small smile tugged at the corner of my lips. Maybe I do. He slid the book across the table, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the weight on my chest eased, just a little. Engagement and lesson. Sometimes we hold on to people for so long that we forget who we are without them. But life has a way of reminding us that endings aren't always the worst thing. Sometimes they're just the beginning of something new. What do you think? Is she ready to move on, or is she just looking for a distraction? Let's jump into the next story. Story 5, The Art of Letting Go. A week had passed since Brandon left. 7 days of waking up to silence. 7 days of resisting the urge to text him, to ask if he missed me too, if he regretted walking away. I wanted to believe that love was enough to bring him back. But deep down I knew better. Some things, once broken, could never be put back together the same way. That evening, I found myself back at the cafe, half hoping the stranger from last time would be there again. And he was. Sitting at the same table, reading another book, sipping his coffee like the world outside didn't exist. For a moment, I hesitated. Was I ready for this? Was I just looking for a way to fill the empty space Brandon left behind? But then, as if sensing my presence, he looked up. A slow smile spread across his lips. You came back. I swallowed. Yeah, I guess I did. He gestured to the seat across from him. Still need a distraction? I sat down, wrapping my hands around my coffee cup. I don't know what I need. He studied me for a moment. Then he said, you don't have to. And for the first time in days, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. We talked for hours. Not about heartbreak. Not about Brandon. But about books, art, travel. The things I used to love before my world had been reduced to someone else's shadow. His name was Caleb. He was studying literature, dreamed of being a writer. Why architecture? He asked at one point. I thought about it. Because I like the idea of creating something that lasts. He smiled. But even buildings fall apart eventually. I tilted my head. That's a depressing way to look at it. Not really, he said. It just means that nothing is permanent. And maybe that's okay. I let his words sink in. Nothing is permanent. Not buildings. Not love. Not even heartbreak. A few days later, I finally found the courage to open my messages with Brandon. His name sat there, untouched. No new texts. No I miss you. No can we talk? And maybe that was my answer. I hovered over his name for a long time. Then, with a deep breath, I deleted the conversation. Not because I wanted to erase him, but because I was finally ready to move forward. Letting go isn't about forgetting. It's about accepting that some things aren't meant to last forever. And that's okay. Because when one chapter ends, another begins. What do you think? Was she ready to move on, or is she just trying to convince herself she is? Let's jump into the next story. Story 6, The Ghosts We Carry. It had been a month since Brandon left. 30 days of silence. And yet he was still everywhere. In the playlist that shuffled onto one of our songs. In the hoodie I found buried under my bed, still faintly smelling like him. In the places we used to go, the inside jokes that now belong to no one. Moving on wasn't a straight line. Some days I felt free. Other days I felt like I was walking through quicksand, sinking into memories I wasn't ready to let go of. And then one evening Brandon called. I stared at my phone, my heart pounding. I could answer. I could let him pull me back in. Or I could choose myself this time. I let it ring. And ring. And then, finally, it stopped. A few minutes later, a text appeared. Brandon, hey. I miss you. I closed my eyes. I had waited for those words. Dreamed of them. But now that they were here, I realized something. I didn't need them anymore. That night, I met Caleb at the cafe. Tell me something true, he said, sipping his coffee. I thought about it. I think I spent too long loving someone who didn't know how to love me back. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, maybe. But maybe you had to figure out what you do deserve. I looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't Brandon. And for the first time, that wasn't a bad thing. Engagement and lesson. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't letting go. It's realizing you've already moved on. What do you think? Should she respond to Brandon, or is silence the answer? Let's jump into the next story. Story 7, When the Past Knocks. It had been 2 months. 60 days of no contact. Brandon's text had gone unanswered, and eventually he stopped trying. The silence that once felt like an open wound had become something else. Peace. But the past has a way of showing up when you least expect it. It happened on a rainy Friday night. I had just finished an exhausting week of work and school, and Caleb and I had plans to meet at the cafe. I was running late, my thoughts lost in the million things I still had to do. And that's when I saw him. Brandon. Standing just outside the cafe, hands shoved in his pockets, eyes scanning the street like he was looking for something, or someone. Me. For a second I froze. Then his eyes found mine. And just like that, the past and the present collided. He walked up slowly, hesitant. Hey. I hadn't heard his voice in months, but it still hit me like a wave. Hey, I said back, keeping my tone even. He looked at me like he was trying to figure out what to say next. You look good. I nodded. Thanks. You too. An awkward silence stretched between us, filled with all the things we weren't saying. Finally he sighed. I shouldn't have left like that. I swallowed. No, you shouldn't have. He ran a hand through his hair, the way he always did when he was nervous. I was scared. I didn't know how to fix things, so I just walked away. I crossed my arms. And now? He hesitated. I don't know. He exhaled sharply. I miss you, okay? I miss us. My heart clenched. The words I had once longed to hear were finally here. But something was different now. I wasn't the same girl who had begged for his attention. I had learned how to be okay without him. I had learned how to love myself more. And maybe that was the difference. Because love shouldn't feel like a constant battle. It shouldn't feel like a question mark. I glanced past him and saw Caleb walking toward the cafe, holding his usual book, completely unaware of the storm brewing in front of me. 2 different paths. 2 different choices. I took a deep breath and looked back at Brandon. And then I made my decision. Some people come back not because they love you but because they realize they lost something good. The real question is, should she give Brandon another chance? Or should she close the door for good? What would you do? Let's jump into the next story. Story 8, The Door That Stayed Closed. I took a deep breath. This was the moment I used to dream about. The moment where Brandon would realize what he lost and fight to get me back. But standing here now, looking at him, I realized something. I wasn't waiting for him anymore. I didn't need him to choose me, because I had already chosen myself. I met his gaze, steady and sure. Brandon, I'm glad you came back. But I'm not the same person you left. He frowned, his expression shifting. I know. And I want to. I held up a hand, stopping him. I don't think we should do this. I don't think we should try again. His face fell. But why? I still love you. I exhaled, feeling the weight of the past lift off my shoulders. Maybe. But love was never the problem, was it? He had no response to that. Because we both knew the truth. Love had always been there. But trust? Effort? Consistency? Those had been missing for a long time. And I refused to settle for half love ever again. I glanced past him, where Caleb was waiting just inside the cafe, watching but not interfering. A part of me wondered if I was walking into something new. But for the first time, it wasn't about someone else. It was about me. I looked back at Brandon and gave him a small, sad smile. Take care, Brandon. Then I turned and walked inside, leaving the past behind me. And I didn't look back. Engagement and lesson. Closure doesn't always come with an explanation. Sometimes, it's simply choosing yourself and walking away from what no longer serves you. What do you think? Was she right to close the door for good? Or should she have given him one last chance? Let's jump into the next story. Story 9. A New Beginning. The cafe door shut behind me, separating the past from the present. Brandon was gone. And I felt free. Not the kind of freedom that comes with running away, but the kind that comes with finally choosing yourself. Caleb was waiting for me at our usual table, flipping through his book but clearly aware of what had just happened. He didn't ask. He didn't push. Instead, he simply said, "You okay?" I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. "Yeah, I think I am." He nodded as if that was enough. And it was. The next few weeks felt different. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't mourning something I had lost. I was creating something new. I threw myself into my work, my projects, my friendships. I went on solo coffee dates, started sketching for fun again, and even signed up for a pottery class, something I had always wanted to do but never made time for. And through it all, Caleb was there. Not as a rebound. Not as a replacement. Just as someone who made life a little lighter. One evening, as we walked along the river, he glanced at me. "You seem different." I smiled. "I think I finally learned how to be happy on my own." He grinned. "That's the best kind of happy." I looked at him, at the way the streetlights reflected in his eyes, at the quiet steadiness he carried. I didn't know what this was between us. But for once I was okay with not knowing. Because sometimes the best stories aren't the ones that follow a script. They're the ones you write as you go. Engagement and lesson. Sometimes, the end of one story is just the beginning of another. Not all love stories are about finding someone else. Sometimes they're about finding yourself. What do you think? Is she truly moving on or is she still healing? Let's jump into the final story. Story 10. The Chapter 1 Write for Myself. A year ago, I would have measured my happiness by the presence of someone else. By the texts I received. The attention I was given. The love I thought I had to earn. But today? Today happiness looked different. It was waking up on a Saturday morning with no plans except to sit by my window with a book and a cup of coffee. It was laughter spilling out of me, unforced and unfiltered, with friends who made life feel easy. It was the rush of excitement when I finally submitted a project I had poured my heart into. It was mine. One evening I found myself back at the cafe, the place where so much had shifted. I wasn't waiting for anyone. I wasn't hoping for a message or replaying old memories. I was just here. Present. Content. And then Caleb walked in. Our eyes met across the room and he gave me that easy smile, the kind that asked for nothing and offered everything. "Funny running into you here," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. I smirked. "It's almost like this is my favorite place or something." He chuckled, setting his book down on the table. "So, what's next for you?" I thought about it. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like something I was chasing after. It felt like something I was creating. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I think that's the best part." Caleb grinned. "Yeah, I think so too. Engagement and lesson. The best love story you'll ever write is the one you have with yourself. And when you finally learn how to love your own company, the right people will show up, not to complete you but to walk beside you. So tell me, what do you think happens next in her story? Does she take a leap into something new? Or does she simply enjoy this chapter of self-discovery? The end, or just the beginning? Here is a lesson for all of us. Over the course of these 10 stories, we followed a journey of love, heartbreak, self-discovery, and growth. It all began with a relationship slowly unraveling, Brandon's absence, his doubts, and the emotional exhaustion that came with trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. The pain of letting go was real, but so was the realization that love shouldn't feel like a constant battle. When Brandon returned, hoping for a second chance, the choice was clear: move forward or repeat the past. And for the first time, she chose herself. From there, we watched her rebuild, focusing on friendships, passions, and the simple joys of life. She learned that happiness doesn't come from being chosen by someone else but from choosing yourself. And in the end, love found her again, not because she needed it, but because she was finally ready to embrace it without losing herself. Life isn't about chasing love. It's about becoming the best version of yourself, and when you do, the right things will align naturally. So if you've ever felt lost in love, remember this: you are already whole. You don't need someone to complete you, you just need someone who appreciates you for who you are. Like, share, and subscribe. If these stories resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Help spread the message of self-love and growth, because everyone deserves to know their worth. What was your favorite part of the journey? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, keep writing your own beautiful story.